Hey you, thanks for stopping by. The day's done, so let's settle in and make ourselves comfortable. I brought a few stories to share. Our first story tonight is called The Laundry That Never Finished. In a quiet house, a dryer buzzed once, and then went quiet again. No one came to open it. Inside, the clothes lay in a warm pile, shirts wrapped around socks, a sweater balled up like a cat in sleep. The last bits of heat clung to them like a gentle memory. Nothing unfolded, nothing folded. One sock found its match in the tangle. A towel shifted slightly, then settled. In another room, somebody stirred, then decided against getting up. The dryer waited, humming nothing. The clothes waited too, soft, warm, and not in a hurry to be anything else. The next story is called The Field That Forgot the Season. There was a field on the edge of a quiet road that didn't seem to realize spring had passed. Clover still grew thick in patches, and wildflowers bloomed like they'd missed a memo. The wind moved through it as if nothing had changed, stirring tall grasses that bent but never broke. A bird stopped there on its way south and stayed a little longer than it meant to. People passed by now and then. Some would glance out the window and say, "Shouldn't that have dried up by now?" But the field didn't listen, or maybe it did and didn't care. It just kept growing what it wanted, greening in slow defiance. The road continued on, and the field stayed the same. This one is called The Teacup That Stayed Steeped. In the corner of a sunlit kitchen sat a cup of tea that had been forgotten. The mug was heavy ceramic, chipped near the handle, and the tea inside had gone cold hours ago. The bag drifted lazily in the amber water, its string curled against the rim like a sleeping tail. Nothing stirred it. No hand reached for it. Still, the scent lingered faintly in the air. Something floral, something warm. The sun from the window hit the side of the cup and made the surface shimmer like old honey. Dust floated through the light in slow, silent spirals. The tea didn't mind. It just stayed where it was. How the forest took attendance. Just before dusk, the forest did what it always did. It checked to see who was there. Not with a roll call, but with sound. The breeze moved through the trees in a slow, questioning hush. Leaves responded in ripples. A fox yawned into the brambles and shifted its weight. Somewhere overhead, a crow lifted one wing but decided not to fly. A pine cone dropped without urgency. A frog blinked in the mud. Even the moss, in its quiet way, answered with stillness. Nothing was missing, and nothing was late. The light tilted just a little more. Shadows softened at the edges. The forest took a breath and let it out. The window that collected moons. There once was an old window that faced east, and every night it caught a different moon. Not the real one, of course, but a reflection, bent and softened by the glass. Sometimes the moon looked like a silver coin, sometimes a cracked egg. Sometimes it didn't come at all, and the window simply waited, humming with quiet. No one opened that window anymore. It had been painted shut years ago. Maybe on purpose, maybe not, but it didn't mind. It was still part of the room, still watching the sky. Over time, it forgot what things looked like in the day, but it remembered every moon it had ever seen, and it held them all, like light pressed gently into the dust. The soap bubbles that floated too long. A child once blew soap bubbles in a quiet backyard, and a few of them never landed. They drifted past the garden, then above the roofline, and kept going. No one reached for them, no one followed. They just lingered. They moved slower the higher they got, as if they weren't in a hurry to go anywhere at all. One caught the setting sun in such a perfect way, it glowed orange from the inside. Eventually they stopped rising, but they didn't fall. They simply became part of the evening. Small, round pieces of breath, hanging where birds had once passed. The quilt that never finished itself. In a cedar chest beneath an old guest bed, there was a quilt that had never been finished. It was folded gently, with the needle still tucked into the edge, and a bit of thread looped around the corner like a secret. No one remembered whose hands had made it, only that it had always been there. The patches didn't match. One square was flannel, another looked like it was part of a curtain. A few were probably scraps from a summer dress or the sleeve of a child's coat. They didn't go together, but they never argued. Even unfinished, the quilt had a kind of weight to it, a soft gravity that said, "This is enough," and that was all it ever needed to be. The mirror that didn't interrupt. In the back hallway of a quiet house, there was a mirror that had stopped showing reflections. Not completely, it still shimmered when someone passed, but it no longer insisted on detail. It let faces blur, let colors soften, let outlines go fuzzy at the edges. No one seemed to notice. People walked by with armfuls of laundry or thoughts too full to see themselves. The mirror didn't mind. It was happy just to hold the shape of things without defining them. When the light was just right, you could stand there and almost disappear. Not in a frightening way, just enough to rest from being looked at. The teapot that waited for rain. There was a small teapot that lived on a windowsill above a sink. It wasn't used often, not since the kettle with buttons had taken over, but no one had the heart to move it, so it stayed there, listening to the faucet and waiting for something slower. When it rained, the drops would tap against the glass in irregular rhythms, and the teapot liked to pretend it was being filled again. It imagined steam and warmth, and being cradled in hands that didn't mind pausing. When the rain stopped, it stayed exactly where it was, but for a little while, it felt useful again, even if only in its own mind. The hallway that forgot where it led. There was a hallway in a building no one visited anymore. It was narrow, with uneven floorboards, and walls painted a faded green. The ceiling creaked when the wind moved above it, and the hallway echoed even when nothing passed through. It still had the shape of purpose, corners, doorways, light switches that used to mean something, but time had stretched it into something looser, less of a path, more of a pause. It didn't lead anywhere anymore, or maybe it did but forgot how to say so. It was content just to be between things. The hourglass with no sand. A small hourglass sat quietly on a bookshelf, but the sand had long since disappeared. Not spilled, just absent, as if it had never been there at all. The glass still held its shape, and the wooden frame still stood without complaint. Sometimes the light hit it just right, and it looked full again. Other times it cast two shadows instead of one. No one turned it anymore, but it remained upright, patient. It didn't measure time now, it simply remembered it. The bell that was never rung. In a drawer full of mismatched keys and curtain hooks, there was a small brass bell. Its handle was slightly bent, and the clapper inside had tarnished into silence. No one had ever rung it, or if they had, the sound had slipped out so quietly that even the walls didn't notice. It wasn't sad. The bell had weight and form, and a curve that caught light. That was enough. Not everything needed to echo to be real. At night, when the house shifted in its sleep, the bell shifted too. Just a little, just enough to remember what it could have been. The hat that forgot its shape. There was a soft-brimmed hat that lived on the back of a wooden chair. It had been there so long that it no longer knew if it was meant to be worn or just draped. The crown had collapsed in on itself, and the brim folded like old fabric. It didn't fall, it just slouched comfortably, like it had melted into the idea of being a hat without having to prove it. The chair underneath never moved, and the sun that came through the window left a faded circle on the seat where the shadow of the hat had settled. The light bulb that was never screwed in. On the top shelf of a dusty closet, there was a single light bulb still in its packaging, not broken, not used, just waiting in its small cardboard sleeve, with the corner slightly worn and the plastic window fogged from time. It had never been twisted into anything, never flickered, never warmed. It didn't seem to mind. The other things around it, an empty jar, a box of thumbtacks, a shoelace without its pair, didn't glow either. When the closet door creaked open once in a while, the light bulb caught a sliver of daylight and held it quietly in the curve of its glass. And that's all I have for tonight. The stories have come to an end, so I'll be on my way. Sleep well, and maybe we'll meet again tomorrow.